Hey everybody, it is Thursday night and this is break. I hope you are all getting some much needed rest and a little fun. I wanted to actually make a little video for you because I've had a couple of emails this week actually from people who were out sick telling me that they were not really sure what the research project was about. I would have hoped that your team members would have clued you in, but just in case they didn't, I decided that I probably better make this little video to go over what my expectations are and what it is I think you're doing for your research. And for some of you, even if you were in class, you might find this helpful. So here we go. All right, so first of all, let me remind you that the research project that we are doing as a class is divided into two parts. We are looking at the social determinants of health generically, and then part two, we are going to be applying what we learned in the Edison neighborhood. All right, so let's just take a look at what we're talking about here. There we go. All right, so everybody knows, hopefully by now, that these are the social determinants of health. And your group, sorry, there's a little dog whining in the background. He's a little bit hungry for dinner, but I'm going to do this first. Your group has decided upon one of these 6 categories: economic stability, neighborhood and physical environment, education, food, community, and social context or healthcare system. And then you were asked to actually narrow down an issue that your group was interested in researching for this topic. So before I talk a little bit about what your groups are supposed to specifically be doing, let me remind you that every group is supposed to go put themselves into a group format. This is a set of tools for you to use as a group. In your group location, you can email each other in case you forget each other's contact information or didn't share it. You have the ability to exchange documents if you're not using Google Doc or something like that. Also, the other thing that's important about this is if you have something to turn in as a group, you just turn it in once and everybody gets the grade because you're in the group. So I've got some arrows here. This is if you look over here, if you click this group link in the left-hand column of the Blackboard page, it will take you to this place right here. It might not look exactly the same because, as you can see, I've got some options up here because I'm the instructor, but it should look pretty much like this. Some of you have actually named your group based on what your topic is. That's what you're supposed to do. Some of you I can see, for example, right here where it says SDH Group 1, there are 3 people in it, but you haven't named your group, so I don't know what group you are. At any rate, if you haven't gone to this page and signed yourself into your group, you need to do that because you won't get grades for your group work if you haven't actually signed yourself in. So this is a self-enrolled situation. You were asked to have one of your group members go in here and rename the group so that the rest of you would know where to go and sign up. So somebody please rename your group with, you can see we've got 2 different neighborhood and physical environment groups. It would actually be good if you would rename your group by what your subtopic is that you are studying in if you're doing parks or something. But the rest of you who actually have groups signed up, you need to put what your topic is there. But if you add all these people up, you will see that we've probably got only about, I don't know, maybe somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 of the people have actually signed yourselves into your groups. You must do that if you want to get a grade for this project. So that's a thing you need to remember. All right, now let's go back to what it is you're supposed to be doing. Some of you will remember this. I put this up in the room when we talked about the work that the group is doing for the first part of this research deal. And I also put this in the announcements, and all announcements go out in your email. So if you were in the classroom at the time, this will be the 4th time you're seeing this. If you were not in the classroom the day that we did this, it should be the 3rd time because it's up in the announcements on Blackboard, and all announcements show up in your email box if you look at your email. All right, so this is what your group was supposed to do. You were supposed to narrow your topic. What do I mean by that? Okay, we've got 6 main topics. You've got some subtopics, And then when you get even to the subtopics, you are going to have to narrow it even farther. You're going to have to ask yourselves as a group, what is it that you are really interested in studying? Then your group was supposed to be thinking about what the root causes are, and you're supposed to think about what ideal access or inclusion is. So for example, if you pick transportation, and I'm just making this up off the top of my head, but ideal access would be that everybody had access to some kind of transportation. If they couldn't afford their own vehicle and gasoline, then ideally there would be some form of mass transit that would enable them to get to the things that they need, the doctor's appointment, the grocery store, the school, whatever. So an ideal access to transportation would be that there was transportation that was available in a reasonable distance and at a reasonable price. And remember, this goes all the way back to our very first conversations in class about what ideal access is. It's how much access would you need to something. We talked about it in terms of ideal student experience. We talked about it in terms of ideal community experience. Now you're going to be narrowing it down in terms of your topic. What would ideal, meaningful, substantive access to transportation look like? What is the minimum amount of transportation availability that would allow people to have well-being in their lives and a healthy community? All right, so once you have thought about those things, that's just a talking process. What are some of the root causes of lack of transportation for everybody? I think I may have mentioned that in the food insecure areas in Maricopa County, we know that 47% of the people who live in those areas don't have transportation, and it's one of the contributing factors to food insecurity. But what are the contributing factors to lack of transportation? So talking about some root causes, talking about what a good situation, an ideal access or inclusion would look like, that's just a conversation that your team should have had. And by talking about it, it's going to help you identify what it is specifically you are interested in researching as a team. And once you have done that, the very next thing to do would be to develop your research questions. And I went over this in class, but let me say it again. A lot of students come to college and they don't know that much about doing a good research paper, and they will tend to put something like, transportation problems or something like that into Google, and whatever comes up is what they'll write about. I want you to be much more intentional than that. I want you to figure out what you're interested in writing about based on these conversations you had about root causes and ideal access to transportation or whatever your topic is. And I want you to develop 2 or 3 or 4 questions that your team is very interested in knowing more about. And that's what you're going to throw into your search bar, are those very specific questions, so that your topic will be very much more intentionally developed. Okay, so when you go into your search bar with your topic, whatever it is, it's going to give you some sources. So the next thing that you need to do is literally develop a bibliography, a list of potential sources that you can ultimately use for writing your report or developing your information for your report. And I've given you the task of using both secondary sources and at least one primary source. I will talk in a few minutes about what's the difference between a secondary and a primary source. After you've pulled up some sources, but before you've read everything that you found, you're going to divvy up the work. In other words, maybe you've got 2 or 3 questions, you've got 2 or 3 people, maybe each of you will take on one of those questions. However your group decides to divide it up, and you're going to start pulling resources and reading them and finding some information that is useful, and you're going to come back together as a group and then share with each other what you've learned. All right, so in this stage of the research, you are not thinking about the Edison Eastlake neighborhood. That isn't until stage 2. If I am researching transportation problems in impoverished neighborhoods or something, I just want to know generically what some of the problems are. I'm not looking at Edison Eastlake. I'm looking at the whole transportation issue, writ large. And so what you're going to come back and talk about is what have you learned with each other. And once you figure out what the themes are and what's important, and you begin to understand why there are transportation problems and what people are trying to do about them and what's working and what's not and so forth, you're going to be ready to come back and present this to the class. So in a minute, I'll talk about what it is you're going to present and where it is you're going to present it. But the only thing I want to tell you right this minute is this first presentation, you do not have to have a fully written report. We're just going to come back with this information from these different social determinants of health. We're going to share it up with each other, and we're going to have a bigger understanding of what a healthy community looks like and what the problems are to getting there, because we're going to have shared all this information with each other. All right, so let's look at what we're doing next. Okay, so here we go. This is just an example of what I expect you guys to do. So let's say that your team picked economic stability, and as you begin talking about it, you're having conversations about what's interesting to you. Maybe a lot of you have debt because it's expensive to go to school and you've had to take out loans and so forth. And maybe you basically can understand from an economic perspective this whole idea of starting life with too much debt. And so that is what you guys decide you are going to go with as a research topic. And that's fine. You could have picked any of these things, but perhaps you picked debt. And I'm using this as an example. So all right, so then after you've narrowed your topic down to debt, you're going to talk about what your root causes are. And I've just sort of brainstormed a possible list of why people end up in debt. Loss of a job. If you lose your job, you don't have any income, you start putting things on a charge card, whatever, you end up in debt. Low wages. Oops. Come back. Low wages, expensive health problem that put you over the edge. Your car died and you had to pay to get it fixed so you could get to work. Sometimes people have a new baby. There's a lot of costs involved in having a new baby. Maybe you needed to move for one reason or another. There's a lot of reasons why people have to move. Bad situation with a roommate, need to move home to take care of a family member, whatever, no longer want to live in the neighborhood where you're living, whatever. But every time you move, there's an expense, and that can put you into debt. Maybe there's a fire. I mean, that's a thing that happens sometimes, and takes people's belongings with it oftentimes, hopefully not lives. But even if it just takes belongings, then you have to replace things. It's expensive. Loss of credit. Sometimes if you do not pay your charge debt for a while, they stop you from being able to use your charge card, and then you are in debt and you actually cannot spend money anymore that you don't have, and it puts you into a problem place. Maybe you cannot afford a doctor's visit, you cannot afford something that you need, books for school, whatever. Expensive tuition, which is where we started, is one of the things that puts people in debt. So this is just kind of, we're looking at causes and effects. All right. So then we're going to talk about, well, what would an ideal access to money be? What would an ideal debt situation? Well, an ideal debt situation would be that everybody had enough to, at least, I say to pay your debts, but I think what I really meant was everybody had enough to pay for their basic needs, to pay for, their place to live, a roof over their head, food, tuition, whatever your basic needs are as in your life or in life in general. That would be what ideal looks like and what would have to happen for that to happen. All right, so now we've sort of brainstormed what are the causes. We've talked to each other about, what would an ideal inclusiveness look like. And then I've asked you to develop research questions. I've developed 3 very simple research questions. How does debt pile up? What can people do about debt? And who helps people who are saddled with debt? Where do you go to find help? So what if those are the 3 research questions? All right, so let's go on to see what we would do once we have figured out our research questions. Okay, so now we've got to develop sources. Where might you find answers? And I have asked you to find secondary sources mostly, but at least one primary source. So let's talk about what those are. A secondary source is somebody who's already written up or talked about this exact same topic or some aspect of the topic, right? They may not have asked the exact same questions that you are asking, but they're talking about, in this case, debt. So the secondary source can be a journal article, a blog post, it could be a video, it could be a video of a panel talking about this problem, or a TED Talk, it could be anything like that. You want to make sure that wherever your source is, though, that they actually know what they're talking about. They could be a scholar. They could be a journalist who fact checks. In other words, a journalist isn't an expert in a topic, but they do check a lot of facts to double check that what they have heard and what they're reporting is true. Or somebody who's worked in the field, for years, and they have years of experience, and so that makes them an expert. All right, so here's the list. It might include typically written products like scholarly articles, news articles, books, but it could also be an interpretive piece, a discussion, an analysis, an evaluation, or a summary of something, or it could be presented like a panel discussion or in a blog or a transcript of an interview or any other social media source. I like TED Talks myself. Okay, now I've also asked you to find at least one primary source. A primary source means that you collect the data yourself. What kind of data might you be collecting? Well, first, whatever it is, you have to be looking for information that is relevant to your subject matter. In my volunteer management class, which some of you might actually be in, one of the students sent me a note asking me whether, oh no, this was in an office hours. Somebody asked me whether they should interview volunteers or if they should interview the person who managed the volunteers. And I asked them, what was your subject matter? And their subject matter was what the experience was working with youth volunteers, what the experience of the youth volunteers is, what the youth volunteers get out of the volunteer experience. Well, since the subject matter was about the actual benefit to the youth, I told them much better to interview the volunteers and see what they're getting out of it, rather than interviewing the people who manage the volunteers and ask them to guess what they think people are getting out of it. So what I'm saying to you is, think about what it is you want to learn, and if you're going to do an interview, who is the best person to learn that from, okay? Another way of collecting primary data is to go observe something. So if you're studying transportation, you might want to go down to the light rail. I don't know what you're, what you're looking for has to be relevant, but you might want to go watch what goes on at the light rail. You might want to watch, or I don't know, it's interesting. If I was doing transportation, one of the things that happens in Phoenix is that there have been some laws passed that basically the point of them is to keep people off the light rail who are transients. And for me, if I was going to look for a primary source, I might want to go interview the city council people, one of the city council people who did that, or one of the city people, to find out why they did it and whether they had any other options, because a lot of the times the people who are transients are riding the light rail because it's cold outside, and you want to know, are they making other arrangements for these people to not be cold? Anyway, you get my point. Whatever it is your primary source, it might be an interview, it might be an observation, it also might be a review of original materials like data or forms, or for example, if your topic was community policing, you could collect bystander videos from YouTube and look at those and see what came up over and over again. But the point is, a secondary source, somebody's already looked at a primary source and given you their opinion of it. A primary source, you're going to look at some original data and you're going to come up with your own opinion of it. If you're not clear about that, email me what your questions are and I will definitely ask. Okay, so now you know you've got to get some secondary sources and some primary sources, and then you've got to be divvying up this information, maybe by question, or maybe you've only got 2 questions and you've got 4 people, so 2 of you take 1 question and the other 2 take the other. But begin looking at this information that you found and figuring out what there is to learn, right? This is the research part. Where can you find secondary sources? So let's just take a look. Google Scholar is a place where you will get articles written by academics. Sometimes they're hard to follow, but I suggest that rather than trying to read the whole thing, you read the abstract at the beginning, and if it sounds like it might have some very interesting information pertinent to what you're doing, that you read through the opening section where they tell you what the problem is and why they're studying it, and then you jump past all of the other stuff and you read the end where they have a discussion and a summary and they're telling you what their conclusions are. And then you do not have to worry about the stuff in the middle where they're basically explaining their method for doing their research. You can just get why they're doing it and what came out of it without reading anything in the middle. All right, of course there's regular Google. At the ASU library, we actually have Ask a Librarian. You can chat with a librarian and you can tell them what you're looking for. I suggest you only do that to them if you have had trouble finding something any of these other ways. And then, of course, there's just this regular one search bar online in the ASU library where you can type in your questions that you came up with, whatever they are. If you recall, I came up with some questions here. Why does debt pile up? What can people do about debt? And who helps people or who are saddled with debt? You can type those questions individually into all three of these resources, and you can also ask them directly to a librarian. So these are places you can look. You could actually do it the old-fashioned way and go to the library, the physical library, and see what you can find. All right, so now you've pulled up all this information. You need to come back and share with each other what you found, because the first thing you want is you want your whole group to have the whole picture, right? And each of you only has a part of the picture because you've divvied up the work. So the next thing to do is talk to each other. And you don't have to do that in person. You can share stuff by email, but you do need to read each other's stuff, right? All right, so what are we going to do with it once we've done that and you've brought it back and you've kind of got the lay of the land for whatever your topic is, you've talked it through and you kind of know what the story is. You now know what the root causes are. You now know some of the things that are being done about it. You now know why it's a hard problem to solve. Hopefully all that came up in your research. You're going to get ready to present it to the rest of the class, because by everybody taking a different topic out of the social determinants of health and then educating each other about it, we will have sort of a whole picture of all of the problems, or a lot of the problems anyway, that keep everybody from having full access to all these social determinants of health and full well-being in their lives. All right, so what are we going to do with that? Well, on March 15th, which is a Friday, you're actually going to post your results on the discussion board. You have 2 choices. You can literally put it together in bullet points and write it up and slap it up there. Or, and actually I'd really prefer this, you can give the report as a video. You can do what I'm doing right now and video what you've learned and give it as though you were standing up in front of the class. It is not important for this to be a fully written out report. That's why bullet points are okay. But I do think that you need to remember, as you are figuring out exactly what you're going to present, whether video or bullet points, that the people that you are presenting to have not done the same research you have. They need to be able to understand the full story based on what you tell them, which is one of the reasons I think it might be easier to do this by video. It's sometimes a lot faster and a lot clearer to say what you want to present than it is to try to type everything out. All right, so what should this presentation include? It should include the questions you research. So tell us what questions you are actually trying to answer before you start telling us what you learned, so that we have the context for what it is you tell us. Then give us the report. I seriously prefer you do it in a video, but it's okay with me if you don't like doing a video, to put it together in short paragraph or bullet form. It does not have to be a full written report. You will need to write out, however, your sources. So whatever your several sources are, you're going to need to share that so that we know where you got the information, and also whatever it is that you post on the discussion board, whether it is a video or and the document with your bibliography, or whether it is just a written thing. There's a place in the Dropbox where you will also have to upload it. The reason for that is it's a team assignment, and I need to give you a grade, and the Dropbox is connected to the gradebook. So it is on the discussion board so that you can look at each other's and respond, and I'll tell you in a minute what the response is supposed to be. But it also needs to go to the gradebook, so that to the Dropbox, so that I can grade it. Okay. So last thing is, after you've posted it, I want you to look at everybody else's research. Your responsibility to your classmates is basically to tell them what else you would like to know, all right? This isn't a time to go, oh, good job. I mean, you can say that if you want. I agree with you. Oh, that's cool. Those are things you can say if you want. That's affirmation. We all love affirmation. But the service that you are doing for each other is to tell them, wow, that was really interesting, and it made me wonder what, X. So what questions were you left with when you read their work or watched their video? For each team, please let them know, and this is not a team. These responses are individual, not they're not your team. For each team, what would you like to know more about? And maybe just tell them a couple of questions about what you would like to know more about. Okay, I don't think you need to do every single team, but try to do whatever teams don't have a lot of other people asking, because I would like each team to have a fair amount of feedback, if that makes sense. So in other words, if you watch something and there are already a lot of comments on it and questions, please go on to something that doesn't have that many and be helpful to your teammates. I will also go through all of them. Myself, I will go through all of them, and I will leave everybody questions. Anyway, that's the drill. And when we get closer to March 15th, or actually probably when we get past March 15th, I will start you in on phase 2, which will have to do with the Edison Eastlake specifically. But just know that this phase 1 of the research is preparation for stage 2, because then you'll know everything about your topic, and then we will go in and find out what we can learn about that exact same topic in Edison. Don't worry about that now. Know that I will give you explicit instructions, and we will have time to work on that later. Okay, so hopefully this is helpful to anybody who is not sure what it is you are supposed to be doing on the first phase of the research, and something of a refresher for those of you who do know but still watched it anyway. Okie dokie, that's it, and enjoy the rest of your short spring vacay, and we will see you in class on Monday.